But in 1967, Israel conquered Gaza, West Bank, Golan Heights. It and from that point on, almost immediately, incidentally, U.S. relations with Israel changed radically at that point, and that's quite important for the U.S. That's us, has a decisive. You and I have a decisive role in what happens there. It's not something far away. Whatever Israel does, it's because you and I permit it to happen. It's the United States who provides the massive support for everything that goes on. It's the United States that vetoes Security Council resolutions calling for an end to illegal occupation and so on. So it's not remote. It's our responsibility. We should not forget. That changed substantially in 1967. Prior to that, U.S. relations with Israel were friendly, but not particularly unusual. In fact, Israel's main military support was coming from France. Its nuclear programs were developed with French inputs. The U.S. was not supporting them. So 67 changed everything. Israel performed an enormous service to the United States. It destroyed secular Arab nationalism. The United States had taken over domination of the Middle East from Britain. Britain had previously run most of the world, particularly the United States. But in 1945, Britain essentially took over the mantle of global domination from Britain, and the Middle East was a central component. There was a conflict in the Middle East, many conflicts. Britain, throughout its control, had tended to support radical Islam in opposition to secular nationalism. For good reasons. Secular nationalism can get out of control. Radical Islam, they assume, they can maintain control over it. The United States took over the same position. 1967, there was an actual war going on between the center of radical Islam, Saudi Arabia, and the center of secular nationalism, Egypt. They were at war in the Yemen, a substantial war. Israel destroyed secular nationalism, supported radical Islam, started a love affair with the United States. It was a tremendous gift. It also changed American discussion. Prior to that, Israel had not been a huge issue, even among American Jews. In fact, prior to 1967, there wasn't even much talk about the Holocaust. Holocaust museums, Holocaust studies, all of this is post-1967. Everything changed significantly. And at that point, Israel began a program of systematic expansion into the occupied territories to take up with the basic goal of taking over whatever it found valuable and leaving out the Palestinian population. So Israel does not want Nablus, for example. There's too many Arabs. The goal is to take what's valuable, expel the population if you can. The ones you can't expel, you can surround them, ignore them, but essentially take it over. The United States has supported it every step of the way. Golan Heights, Israel simply annexed in violation of Security Council orders. Actually, the U.S. joined Security Council in opposing it, but then went on to ignore it, and under Trump formally authorized it. Jerusalem, Israel, again, basically annexed in violation of Security Council orders. U.S. rated it. Jerusalem is now about 5 times what it ever was. Historically, it took in surrounding Arab villages, and through the West Bank, pretty much the same. Gaza we can go into. Well, that's the basic story. In the early 1970s, Israel had a choice. It had a choice between expansion and security, and it chose expansion with the help of the United States. What happened is there was a resolution, several resolutions brought to the UN Security Council, which called for a 2-state settlement on the internationally recognized border, so-called Green Line, with maybe minor adjustments, and called for the recognition, I'm virtually quoting now, the recognition of the right of each state to exist in peace and security within secure and recognized borders. The resolution was supported by Egypt, Jordan, Syria, so-called confrontation states, tacitly supported by the PLO, not openly. Israel strongly objected to it, refused even to attend the session. The United States vetoed the resolution. That pretty much set the stage for what has been happening since. Israel at that time was expanding into the Egyptian Sinai. That was a crucial issue. But the basic point was, is it going to be expansion or security? And Israel chose expansion, which means almost total reliance on the United States, because it becomes, of course, there's plenty of international objection. And finally, at this point, it's almost become an international pariah. But as long as it has U.S. support, it feels it can go ahead. It brings us up to the present, when Israel has been shifting. It was predictable in 1967 and predicted, in fact, that if Israel continued with the occupation, it would become harsher, more brutal internally. One of the most respected figures in Israeli society, pretty much a traditional Jewish sage of Yeshayahu Leibovitz, highly regarded. He went so far as to say that if Israel continued the occupation, it would become a country of what he called Judeo-Nazis. Only somebody like Leibovitz could have gotten away with saying that, but others were saying similar things in more muted tones. We've seen it happen. Then the dynamics are pretty straightforward. You have your boot on somebody's neck. You have to find a way of justifying it. It does something to you internally, anybody, a country too. So the country has shifted pretty far to the right. By now, it's one of the very few countries where young people are more reactionary than their parents, more extreme nationalist and racist and so on. Parents sort of remember the older days when there was a social democratic liberal community, but by now almost disappeared. It's now a religious nationalist government, which, like it or not, has plenty of popular support. There's an interesting article you might look at in today's edition of Haaretz, the major Israeli newspaper, the English edition. It compares Turkey and Israel and points out that in Turkey, as in Israel, whether you like it or not, a religious nationalist element is the majority, which is opposed to democracy. He said, so we have to recognize, we don't like it, but you can't pretend it's not happening. In fact, similar things are true elsewhere. You take a look at Iran, a lot of repression by a brutal government. There's plenty of popular support. You go to the rural areas, deeply religious areas, find extensive support for the guardian council of harsh, brutal clerics. These are things we may not like them, but the world doesn't go away if they don't like it. And the case of Israel is like that. It's pretty much where we stand today. So the key issues have changed, but the basic one that was recognized by Ahad Ha'am remains.